You know the day destroys the night, night divides the day. Try to run, try to hide, break on through to the other side. Break on through to the other side. Break on through to the other side.
God bless America. Welcome to The Ranch, everybody, the podcast that explores the people and happenings of Dry Creek Ranch, Eagle, and the greater Boise area. Quick reminder to make sure you get your sprinklers blown out. You do not want frozen pipes in the wintertime. It's a huge hassle, and there are several companies in the area that will happily do it for you. So just jump on the Facebook group or ask your neighbor, but somebody I guarantee you knows who's getting their sprinklers blown out, and you can get it done too. So don't let that stuff freeze. My guest today is running for District 19 CA in the House of Representatives for the state of Idaho. She is a retired individual. She moved up here years ago, raised her family. Her family still lives here. She lives right around the corner in Hidden Springs, which is awesome. We shared our love for the Merc Burger, but we did end up talking about a lot of fiscal responsibility and individual responsibility within the state and where she sees these things going and where she thinks there could really be progress, which I found to be very valuable. So without further ado, the woman, the myth, the legend, Melissa Christian. How are you? Thank you for coming.
Absolutely. It's great to be here, and I'm doing well.
Good, good. So you don't live too far away, actually, so I hope the commute wasn't too bad. About 10 minutes to Hidden Springs?
I think it's about that, yes.
Yeah.
And it's an easy road, especially since ACHD just did a nice repaving. It's a little less bumpy.
Right. I actually did a food review for the Spring House. I know everybody calls it the Merc.
I review it. I read that, actually. I should say listen to it, yeah.
Yeah.
And the hamburger is outstanding. You nailed it.
Yeah, there's something... a lot of times when I get gluten-free, bread of some sort, a bun or whatever, it's always falling apart. It's not very... But the Spring House just nails it, man. I have no idea what they do, but it's fantastic.
And I think they've changed some of their menu items. When I first moved here, I tried their hamburger, and I thought, and I always try to, when I go to a local restaurant, I ask, do you buy local meat? That's important to me to support Idaho, small businesses, family businesses, try to keep as much local going as we can. And I do believe they changed that with the new, because, they have 4 families that now manage all of that. And I think that changed. And for me, that made a difference in the taste of the burger. Otherwise, I go to Sid's. Sid's Garage, best fries ever.
I've never had Sid's. Where's that?
There's one in Boise, but the one that I first tried and fell in love with is at the Village. Oh. The downside of Sid's is that they do play music a little bit too loud for me. It's 80s. I don't want to hear all Billy Idol. So I go when because it can get kind of noisy there. But the food is terrific. And I love the fact that when you pay cash, you get a 3% discount. So again, it's looking at a small business and thinking, how do you benefit a small business? I try very hard to pay cash as often as possible, especially with local businesses. So obviously the cash is an avoidance of taxation, but in a state like Idaho, you have an abundance of tax dollars at this point. We are surplus tax dollars. We're drowning in tax dollars.
So help me understand this, because especially from people coming out of the state, it's very difficult for me to understand. Like, how is it that we have it was like 1.8 billion or just some astronomical number? It's like, wait, why do we continue taxing people? Or like, why aren't we just slashing, taxes off the books left and right? Like, where is the money coming from, and why are we still collecting it?
Well, the first $600 million was from property tax revenue and other sales tax. Why? Because how many people are pouring into the state? So that's pretty easy to figure. The rest of it is you have CARES Act, and then you have what I call Biden dollars, but basically they're all federal dollars. And most conservatives agree that why didn't that money come back? And that's a concern that I have going into my campaign is I have a couple of things I really feel strongly about. One of them is school choice and how that's set up. But yeah, how we're managing these dollars. And on my website, a lot of people talk about where we have to address taxation or property taxes. Well, taxes are a symptom of overspending. And yeah, so clearly if we have over $1 billion in excess, sure, some should go to reserves. I'm not sure that really happened. And the rest was spent on a lot of programs. And there is some refund one time to the residents here, but that's not that problem isn't going to go away. And they're already saying, well, we're not going to make the same surplus in 2022 that we did in 2021. No, but you're still going to have a surplus. So why is it we pay the gas tax we do, and why is it the grocery taxes? Just in my personal opinion, abomination to all classes of Idahoans, no matter what your political party is. Property taxes, I think it's interesting they do an assessment during the peak real estate season, which is spring. And then no matter what happens to the economy afterward, and we know that real estate has dropped in Idaho by at least 15%, but yet we're still going to have an assessment that's based on, and the time to appeal it is over with, so you can't appeal it and you're stuck there. I think there's a lot of options for property taxes. I very much want to see some type of what I would say a waiver of all property tax. If you've lived here, maybe in your primary residence, for example, 10 years, 15, whatever the marker is, those people should not be paying any property tax. We have native Idahoans, especially retired folks, I'm retired, that are going to work as cashiers and doing other jobs that many people won't do to pay their property tax. That's awful. When we have a surplus that we do here, no, that needs to be looked at differently. I had a great conversation with Senator Scott Grow. I don't know if you know him. And I'm just getting to know some of the people a little bit better in office as we're out on the campaign trail. And I loved what he said. He was in a meeting and he said, do you know if we take 0.5% of the sales tax that we collect, it would be more than all of the property tax revenue that we do collect currently. Can you imagine what could be done with that?
Wait, so he's saying of all the sales tax
and
we
he's
collect,
a CPA, so I'm going to trust his
right,
numbers.
I believe you.
Yeah.
0.5% of all the gross sales tax. So say we make $100 in sales tax. If we took 50 cents of that, that would be greater than all of the property tax that we collect in the state of Idaho.
Correct. That was his statement. And let's say that 70% of that is true. Again, as a CPA, I do trust him, and he went public with it. So let's just assume those statements are correct. And he has talked about it before. So I guess the bigger question is, why doesn't our legislature make any progress on this issue? Just doing a one-time rebate, thank you, Governor Little, but that's my money to begin with. I have a particular view of taxes, which is, there are people that say, well, the government this and the government that. No, the government doesn't make any money. They may print money, but they don't make money. All money is our money, period. Right. And I think if you take that attitude, it starts to, I hope, affect the perception you have about what the government does with your money.
Right. I actually had this very involved debate with a friend of mine who still lives in California, and he was saying, "Well,
I'm so sorry."
I don't think
your friend.
I don't think he minds. What's interesting is a lot of friends that I have there still they struggle with the situation, but they also don't attribute any of the situation to the way they're voting, which is a curiosity to me, yes. Right? So, for instance, this argument I had with him was very much centered around the idea that he was saying, look, if you're conservative, you want money back from the government. And if you're liberal, you want money back from the government, or you want money from the government. I'm like, okay, these two statements are not the same. If you take $10,000 away from me and I say, hey, give me some of my money back, you shouldn't take 10, you should only take 8, or you should only take 7, or you should take 0, whatever your opinion is. You're taking money away from me and I'm saying take less money. And the flip side of that we were talking about is, say, government programs, where the government is then giving somebody, say, $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 for something. He's like, it's the same thing. If you get a tax reduction of $3,000, it's the same thing as asking for money from the government to the tune of $3,000. It's like, no, it's not. No. One, you generated money and they took a portion of it, and the other, you're taking someone else's money that they became the middleman with. These are completely different ideas. And he was just, again, it was like, it had no willingness to acknowledge that literally one is robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Well, that's exactly what it is. And Obamacare, which I am still against for lots of different reasons. I saw that as the death knell for having choice in healthcare, and I have not been wrong on that. But it's the same thing. It's a cost shifting, and healthcare's the term cost shifting has been used in healthcare for 30 years because it's just a movement of the money or a shell game. The other thing about that interesting argument is I would say the liberal side of it is that philosophy they have only builds greater dependency on the government.
Right.
Whether it be free this, nothing's free, right? Free this or free that, or Obamacare is just a disaster. I keep going back to that because it's a really good example of the way it was presented. It was presented as access to health care. Well, no one, and I know Labrador is facing some challenge on this for his words. I happen to agree with him. There's no issue about access to health care. You can go to any ER if you are truly ill, and life-threatening ill, or
Sure.
you believe it's life-threatening ill. It's called the layperson's version of life-threatening. You are completely protected by EMTALA. Now, the cost of health care is different, but no one wanted to talk about that because Obamacare is a losing argument for the cost of health care. Now everyone has a $7,000 or $8,000 deductible. That's heinous. Well, but I get subsidies on my premium. Yeah, but what are you going to do when you actually have to go in and see a doctor? Or, God forbid, go in and have surgery? You now have a $7,000 deductible.
Right. And the argument that, for instance, part-time workers, part-time employees did not were not required to be provided health care from their employer. Mm-hmm. I at the time I had a client, education client. I was working with this family. They owned, I think, like 5 or 6 different restaurants, and wonderful Italian restaurants. And this guy had built these up over, I think, like 20 years. So this is this really grand endeavor that he had taken. I mean, the restaurant business is notoriously an incredibly difficult business to turn a buck in. So the fact that he had made it 20 years and actually had franchised a bit. Actually, I misspoke. He didn't franchise. He still owned them all. So the point is he had 5 or 6 restaurants. He's like, look, when you come in and you require me to provide healthcare for all of my part-time employees, like that is literally going to increase our costs by, I think he said $300,000. Mm-hmm. And he said, look, how much do you think these restaurants make? We're, small mom and pop Italian restaurants are net at the end of the year that I get to pull out of for my salary isn't $300,000. And I think he was making something like $40,000 after everything per restaurant. And it's like the heartache that he was having to go through and the difficulty and risk he was accepting to go through to make that $40,000 per restaurant and then to have all of this additional expense chalked on. He was like, what are we going to do? And so again, ultimately, I think what happened for him is that they had to obviously increase prices. Mm-hmm. This was not at a time when a lot of people were looking to go out.
Right.
And the restaurant, again, industry it's a difficult thing to conceptualize, but you have an infinite capacity to avoid it. Okay, so say a pipe breaks in my house, okay, under my sink. I can't avoid replacing that pipe. I have to go to Home Depot. I have to go to Ace. I have to go to Lowe's. I have to go somewhere, right? There's no point in my life when I say, I have to go eat at this Italian restaurant.
Correct.
I have an infinite capacity to avoid it. So when you're dealing in an industry, hospitality and whatnot,
it's a luxury.
Luxury, you can avoid it indefinitely.
Sure.
To force people in a down economy to increase their prices to compensate part-time workers that may have jobs at multiple different places. Mm-hmm. It's just, man, it's an unfortunate thing. Obamacare did have some real serious problems like that. Well,
and the ruse in that is that having been a waitress, that's how I put myself through college, the restaurant industry tends to have younger workers. And guess how much health care they use?
Right.
Close to nothing.
Right.
Right? So that's the ruse of Obamacare. It was about, well, we've got to cover every, the challenge we had was twofold. There was about 15% of the population that needed access to, what I would call catastrophic care. We don't want people going bankrupt because they broke a leg and had to go to an ER. That one's easy, or you develop cancer and things like that. But instead of fixing that 15%, we basically ruined it for the other 85, and drove up cost. And
And we reduce competition. I mean, you carve up the country, you carve up individual states, and you tell individual insurance companies that they have claim over this. And it's like, it's almost, I mean, I hate to be dramatic, but it's almost kind of mafia style. It's like, this is your territory. You get to charge whatever you want. Don't make it too egregious so people complain, but this is your spot. Like, the insurance company from Montana is not going to come here into Idaho or California and start arguing with you about your prices, right? Or competing against you. So we reduced competition and made sure everybody got an acceptable slice of the pie, except the consumer. Because there's no benefit to the consumer when you lack competition in a consumer market.
And a good example of that is, and I will give President Trump some credit there, taking away the individual mandate. You know, unfortunately, we do have challenges with people that pose as conservatives in our Congress. But knocking that one leg out, there are actually two legs of Obamacare that got knocked out, but the one of the individual mandate. So when I retired, when I left my bigger corporate job, I would say, I then did some consulting. And so I bought what was available in this state is what's called short-term insurance. So if you're not part of the Obamacare, bucket, if that's not your deal or you can't afford it, which is probably more true for most people, here in Idaho, we had what are called short-term insurance plans, and they were catastrophic, so they didn't cover pre-existing. When I talked about the 15%, pre-existing conditions was a part of that, and that could have been fixed in one fell swoop, but instead we, destroyed everything. And so I had a short-term insurance plan. Initially, they were 10 months, and I do work with a broker. Between my knowledge and hers, we're good. We figure things out, network access, all that. And it was very affordable. Again, it was intended to be catastrophic. I think the deductible was, it was $2,500 or $2,000, which is not unusual and it was a PPO. And then the insurance commissioner in Idaho made some decisions about making that harder to access. We also, as you know, have a lot of programs they're not insurance companies, but they're more associations that are, supported by Christian ministries. A lot of people go do those. So as Obamacare became less affordable and less desired by people for different reasons, more people started going to the short-term plans. Well, it went from a 10-month plan then to a 6-month plan. And this is the Idaho Insurance Commissioner that's overseeing this. So one can only surmise that the goal was to get more people into Obamacare because you went from a 10-month plan to a 6-month plan. And I just kept doing that so I could do this 6-month plan, and then I would go to that 6 months plan. Again, I have no claims. I'm thankfully pretty good health. Again, for me, it was catastrophic, and it was reasonably priced to be catastrophic. And you can do things for cash, too, so outside that. And it was interesting at the same time, we're talking 3 years ago, the Christian ministries were seeing a surge in enrollees because families to try to go on Obamacare. And, even when you're with a small employer, what you're being offered is the 4 metal plans. It's Obamacare. And they can't afford it. People can't afford it. So what was unfortunate, I think it was about a year ago, as I'm going through my patchwork, I leap from this 6 month to that 6 month. Then the insurance commissioner in Idaho decided to implement a 62-day mandatory break. So if I want to have a short-term access plan,
you have to wait
62 days without any insurance whatsoever.
So this was all just incentive to get people onto Obamacare.
I don't know what else, because when I look at what it does, are you going to go 62 days without insurance? And, you could just never leave your house because, God forbid, you have a car accident or catch COVID and get sick, or catch anything, right?
Yeah,
sick,
have
or
a gallstone,
exactly.
Gallbladder infection. Like,
so
you could have anything.
So the only way you could go to the next 6-month plan, which is to go 62 days without insurance whatsoever. And that is where, again, as an independent business person, I said, well, now I've got to suck down this horrible Obamacare cost. And so my premium last year was $785 a month with a $7,000 deductible. And I know how to pick a plan.
Yeah, right.
But there's very few options outside that. This year it's been $815. I could talk about, I do get some subsidies back, but I don't do it through the state of Idaho because the way that the state of Idaho wants you to apply to Obamacare is, to me, a little intrusive. Here, we need all of your tax records. Yeah, no, I don't think so.
Yeah, or you just give me health care. Like, I'll tell you if I smoke or not. Like, that's all you need to know.
Yeah. And so that, for me, what's really missing in the healthcare landscape is choice. And so I talked to someone recently, and they're going to go to what's called a direct primary care program. They're going to give a primary care physician, $100 a month or whatever to have full access. I support that, but I caution them. You have to be careful of the emergency stuff. So it's a family, and they're going to go through Medishares or a similar program. And I said, again, be careful, because the Christian ministry programs had such an influx of people trying to get something affordable other than Obamacare, which isn't affordable, that claims went up and, activities went up, and then they had to, most of them have now either a 3 or 5 year pre-existing clause. And so if you're taking blood pressure medicine and you lie about that on the application, and then something happens 2 years from now, and you end up with a heart problem, they're going to pull the records. That's what insurance companies did, and they'll void your entire plan because you lied on the application. So it's so difficult to see that consumers have so little choice. And in Idaho, It's really upsetting to me what the insurance commissioner has done. Again, personal opinion.
Yeah, the denial of care because of pre-existing conditions was one of the things that I thought was valuable in the Obamacare legislation.
I agree with you.
I have a dear friend who actually lives in Utah, and his daughter developed leukemia at the age of 1 or 18 months. She was very young, and she's since beat it. But my mom worked in the healthcare industry, so was my dad, and she would tell me these horror stories about people that had lifetime maximums that they had already reached by the age of 10 or something. She's like, this poor kid, this disease befalls this person. It's not because she, smoked and drank for 40 years. I mean, this is like a 10-year-old. And you run up a $500,000 or, $1 million bill, and then you are uninsurable from that point on. Yes. So that aspect of it, again, I think was positive, but you had to swallow so many terrible things along the way.
That 15%, we talk about the 15%. Again, I remember I was living in California at the time. I am a domestic refugee, but I was smarter than most people. I got here years ago because I saw what was happening, and Obamacare was part of it. But I would see cases. I remember one, there was a Cigna case, there was an Aetna case, and people actually took to social media and called out the CEO. And the CEO made the business mistake of responding. He responded the right way, but now every appeal is going to go to the CEO on Twitter or Facebook, right? So, but no, it was awful. There were hairdressers that would be paying for individual plans, and one developed cancer, and they're not going to cover it because they found she didn't call out her blood pressure. I mean, it was crazy, but it goes back to, we had a small problem that was easily fixable, and instead they basically upset the whole system. And candidly, the insurance companies, to a certain degree, supported it because the cash flow to them became large.
Right.
However, they counted on what's called the 3 Rs, which is the risk factors that Obamacare allegedly was going to provide insurance companies. I don't want to get too granular about it, but insurance companies, like auto insurance companies, they underwrite you based on your health status. Okay, so Obamacare took that away. Insurance companies would tier risk. You could have 8 to 11 tiers. Obamacare only allowed 4. So again, the mishmash behind the scenes is that it became harder for insurance companies to really figure out how to project the claims cost and then price for it. And then they expected to get some revenue back from the government that the government changed their mind about, of course, which at the time the insurance company I worked for said, that is not going to happen for us. And sure enough, they took away the risk money. So yeah, I don't think anybody wins with Obamacare.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing to navigate, and it's too complex for even an educated individual. I mean, again, my dad is a physician, and just talking to him about the nuances, he's an employer and he's a physician, and it's a train wreck, right?
Yes,
And he was telling me that he was paying upwards of, I think, $1,000 a month for a healthy 25-year-old individual working in his office who didn't have any kids.
Correct.
It's like $1,000 a month going to these people. He said it's impossible to cover as an employer. It's like that's, and again, I've always been self-employed, so I sympathize because it's, hey, I've always purchased my insurance. I've always known exactly how much we have to pay, and we're talking tens of thousands of dollars annually. There's like, what is happening here? I mean, I have zero medication. I have zero pre-existing conditions. I am
shifting.
Right. I am as healthy as possible, and have been all through my adult life. But the astronomical sum that my family has paid is just almost laughable. It's unconscionable.
Yeah. And the really tough part about the cost of healthcare goes back to, as I said, it's limited. It really is so fueled by, I'm going to be careful here, but a lack of accountability from the consumer. We have plenty of resources to take care of cancer. We do, plenty. Where the money gets short is when we're managing people's type 2 diabetes, which is from obesity, or lung cancer from smoking. Again, I'm not demonizing people. These are lifestyle choices. We were discussing earlier about when we looked at the data within the insurance company. It's not just the one I worked for. We all see the same thing, is that you've got obesity-related conditions tied to the top 6+ cost drivers of all of healthcare. So if we could get people to be a little bit more, better about taking care of themselves, but that's tough. You have people that make lifestyle choices. The challenge is we can't underwrite that in insurance, right? I can't charge you more because you smoke and you're 100 pounds overweight. By the way, that's your choice. I'm a little bit of a libertarian in the sense that I'm not going to tell you how to live your life per se, but I don't think it's also fair that other people have to always pay for those things. And it's a challenge.
Right, a challenge. You talk about transparency and accountability within the healthcare system, but you also, one of your 3 primary things is transparency and accountability within education, within public education. Help me understand that, because there's so much being said about public education at this point with school choice and, obviously the social pressures coming from other places in the country. What is it to you? So when you talk about transparency and accountability, what does that mean?
I think it starts with the desire of the teachers and the public school administrators to want to talk with parents. My child is raised, 35. She's married. I have 2 great grandkids. She initially, when she was younger, went through a private school for a period of time that was right for us. And I do believe in the good things that can happen at public school. Again, we were very, very fortunate. I chose where I lived based on the school district, so it was a really big issue to me. We had a great experience. I don't think schools are the same that they used to be, for lots of different reasons. And what I see in Idaho, when we went through the COVID thing, I don't think that children's education was really prioritized. I think parents... I think it was a wake-up call for parents about what was really going on in the schools. And, of course, now you look at some of the contents of the books, and I'll put a semicolon on that comment. So as a grandparent, I was so excited to take my now 4-year-old grandchild and my 20-month-old grandchild to the library in this city in which they live, which was Meridian. And we were in the 3-year-old section, and get the big thick board. Well, I was horrified by the books that I saw, absolutely horrified. In fact, I take pictures because people will say, no, that doesn't really exist. And here's the picture, right? I don't think it's appropriate that in the 3-year-old section there's a book on pronouns, with men calling themselves women and all that. That's a subject for a different age group at some point. So going back to public,
and a subject perhaps not at any point for public school. Right, like let's go ahead and say, all right, look, you want to talk about pronouns, let's at least save that till 10. Okay, but let's grab some fifth graders.
And it's in your public library, and
Right.
maybe only adults or certain kids over certain ages can check those books out. And unfortunately, the Meridian Public Library has pushed back on all of that. That's a whole other story for another day. But
They
going
have
back
they have some very real issues with that, right? Because there was some organized protest over the books that they were providing to the public.
I was there.
There you go.
Yeah, I am an activist, especially with my grandkids. I say to anybody, everything I fight for is not just for my family. That's certainly one of the triggers of me running for office, but I'm trying to fight for yours as well. If the teachers, let's say, if the public school administration and culture and philosophy are not willing to come together with parents and have negotiations, right, or reasonable discussions of where's the middle ground, then I do think it's appropriate that parents be allowed to take their allocated tax dollars per student and go find a school that fits them. So I've gone from school choice really to, the Arizona model of funding should follow the student. Because if the schools are not going to be willing to sit down and have reasonable discussions with parents, the legislature tried to pass a bill that mandated schools to have committees made up of both parents and teachers to talk about the content of the school curriculum, especially K through 6. I think those are the things that we all target. My opponent, as a matter of fact, voted against that.
Why is that?
You'd have to ask her. Yeah, why would you not want, if we have either the public schools believe the parents have a misperception of what's being taught, or the parents are not correct in what's being taught, then why aren't we sitting down? And the fact that that no one is, or some people are not supporting that content of curriculum should be discussed. If we're never going to get there, then, Fisher Cup it, right?
Right.
Let me take my money, and you can do your thing, and I'll make sure my kid, as I would private school, or whether I choose to homeschool, and I never would. I'm not that brave. I'm not that smart. So, again, I've seen really great schools come up, and I think that's, if we can't get parents and public schools to be able to talk to each other, even if the conversations are uncomfortable, especially the first few are going to be uncomfortable, but to really look through content and what's appropriate and what is everyone comfortable with. And we want our kids to learn. I'm not keeping anyone away from To Kill a Mockingbird. It's a phenomenal book. There are difficult books called The Bluest Eye. I'm a fan of Toni Morrison. I've done studies on that as well. But if we can't get there, then the solution is honestly to part ways. And I would be fine with that. It's not ideal, but if we can't get to a point where we figure out how to work together for the benefit of our children, then you need to allow the parents to take their taxpayer money elsewhere.
Right. And one of the beautiful things about bringing a wide, diverse population together to make policies is, okay, obviously it's going to be a horrific conversation because you have, conservatives, you have liberals, you have religious, you have non-religious, you have everybody coming to the table, and everybody has equal stake, right? Like, it doesn't matter if you have a kid in the school, then it doesn't matter if you're religious or not religious, doesn't matter if you're liberal or conservative. You have somebody in the school, and therefore you have a stake in the school.
That's correct.
The beautiful thing about bringing an enormous variety to the table to select curriculum is that you will inevitably strip away everything that's not education oriented.
Yeah.
Right. So let's say you have somebody who's Christian leaning. They're like, well, I think we should have, Christian values and Christian teaching. And then the person who's, say, atheist is like, yeah, no, I don't think that we should scrap that. Exactly. So you beat everything back and forth, and you're like, all right, what do we think about geometry? And he's like, well, I guess geometry, I guess we can leave that in there. It's like, okay, wait. Yeah. What do we think about reading comprehension? You're like, oh, shoot. Okay, yeah, leave that in, fine. But again, when you bring, the risk is when you have this kind of monoculture where you have just a select ideology that is making the curriculum, that will only reflect that specific ideology. Mm-hmm. And it will not ultimately reflect the best education choice, the best education selection. You need a variety of people coming to beat up on all of it. And then only, all the fat will be trimmed, and you'll be left with most likely the 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic.
Let's hope.
Right. And everything after that, it's like, do we want art program? Okay, well, if you're a Christian or non-Christian, you probably value art to some degree. Or music. Like, I love music.
And can we get civics back in school?
Right. Like, and again, not to seem antiquated, but it's like, look, could we get some kind of home ec? Right. Like these are not.
Don't forget physical education.
Right. Can we do PE? So okay, the kids need to blow off some steam. So we need to have them running around. It wouldn't be the worst thing to teach somebody how to make a pancake. Like, let's have some civics. Let's run some government. Let's run some English, some math, some history, and beyond that, because we cannot all agree on the value of these individual things. And we need to have a consensus because not everyone will agree in a Bible class, because not everyone will agree with a pronoun class, because not everyone will agree with these other things. Let's strip them away. That can be left for extracurricular programs. That can be left for in-home education. That can be left for all these other things. But at the very least, if you had a truly diverse committee that actually hashed it out, you would get a robust curriculum that everyone could agree on, which would ultimately be better for the public education, for the public school system at this point.
Well, and I think a lot of what's invaded, if you will, public school is cultural issues that I do believe should be kept at home. And there, it goes back to when I talk about accountability for your health care and your health. It's kind of the same thing. I mean, parents have abdicated a lot of their role to the schools innocently.
Right.
I was very fortunate. Again, my daughter went to a fabulous high school. We happened to have what's called open choice there, so you could choose within a certain range which high school your child went to. And we opted for that. We did research at public. We did research at private, and then research the public. My daughter was so blessed to go to, she has no idea how good her high school was, right? Because a child's just going to choose what they take from it. She was involved in sports as well. But I was so impressed when I would go to open houses and I would see the books she's reading. And, I'm a kid of the 70s and we didn't teach at that level. She was so fortunate to, I would say, make it into AP classes. They weren't always easy, but I do believe in I believe all children are gifted. This goes back to some other stuff I went through, but I believe all children are gifted. They're different gifts. I believe all children should be given options to find their gift. So, when you have the charter schools or the STEM schools, I think that's a great idea. We did it in that particular high school. It was just a matter of whether you wanted AP or not, if you wanted to go in that direction. And they were hard classes. And I have friends that said, I took my kid out of that class, it was too hard. No, I want things hard.
Right.
Stretch. Maybe
right.
You won't make
to
it.
To a point.
Yeah, to a point. I mean, I don't want to bury the kid in something that if the child can't understand it or just, isn't comfortable or isn't interested. But I hope that I raised a child. I believe that I've raised a child that understands, you were given a lot of opportunities. And what you choose to do with them, especially as an adult, is yours. And now she's raising 2 children. It's very interesting for me to watch that. It does pay off. And I want to go back to make a comment, too. Now, I am a Christian by faith, and I am conservative. But in as much as I support, what I would call old school things about, bringing God, blah, 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 I don't think, this may be heresy, but I don't think that the school is the place that you bring the Bible into. I don't think you should ban it. I mean, you shouldn't not allow prayer groups at lunchtime or things like that. But so on social media, I'll speak out about something and someone challenged me on it was the school chose, the funding issue. So you think it's fine. What if I want to raise my kid in the satanic temple of whatever? And I go, that's on you. I do believe that with the funding that we still need to have some type of baseline of standardized testing just to make sure that, the children aren't being taken advantage of. It's like anything else, Matt. It's a balance, right?
Right.
But I'm not an advocate of necessarily praying in schools. I think it's great if you do. You can have a moment of prayer, but you can also pray during recess. You can pray at home. You can pray in the morning. I mean, your relationship with God, whomever your God is, doesn't necessarily have to exist in a classroom. So that may be heretical, but
And the satanic temple argument
they always go to the extreme.
is so humorous to me because it's like, all right, look, you're gonna worship like the owl god or something. Like, I don't know who you're worshiping. That's fine. Are they learning math? Right. And like, are we doing like really good reading comprehension in this school? And again, first off, these things don't exist. The satanic temple homeschool co-op doesn't exist. Correct. Where there are all these Satanists that are like, hey, this is, and some schools, not satanic, but some schools do exist that are, hey, you have a group of parents who are like, look, let's all homeschool our kid. Yeah. And what we'll do is we'll crowdfund, we'll source. Yes. And we'll pool our money together. We'll make a school and we'll do that. These things already exist. None of them are satanic, by the way.
Well, no, it's always about the extreme argument of trying to get you to. It's basically a trap, for
right. But it doesn't even pass life like the laugh factor. Yeah. Like, this is not a like. What if you want to make a restaurant where everybody eats, I don't know, cow manure? Okay, well, that doesn't exist, right? Like, people don't actually do that in practice.
But you absolutely have the right to do it. You got to pass health department,
Right, that's the thing. You have to pass what we all agree is absolutely a base requirement to have an establishment like this, which means you actually can't have cow manure there, right? And if you want to open a crazy school, that's fine. Are you teaching math and English? Right? Like, can you pass a base standardized test? Yeah. But, you already have people. We do not require that when somebody homeschools their child, say I want to homeschool my kid. I'm a crazy person, right? And I'm like a Satanist or something. And I decide to work that into the curriculum. Well, there's no one that's going to stop me. That you can already do this. If you're a Satanist and you want to like go home and do it, where are all the Satanists running around? They're not. My point is, it's such a laughable argument. Yes. Because we already have private Christian schools. We already have the capacity to have charter schools and private, homeschool co-op kind of things. We already have the ability to do all of this. But people keep coming back to this like, well, what if you want your federal tax dollars going? It's like, just stop. If I homeschool and I get a stipend from the state or the federal government to buy curriculum or teach my kid at home, I can already do whatever kind of crazy stuff I want. And the federal government is funding that to some degree.
Well, so I'm going to correct you, though, from our earlier conversation. No, the government isn't giving you anything. You're getting your own money back.
The money I put in.
Your money. It's always your money.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a speaking of taxes, I did want to ask something that you mentioned. Did you say that you think that people that have lived here for 15 or 20 years should be exempt from property tax?
If it's your primary resident and you live there. Yeah. And I laugh because I say, well, I've been here, 11 years. So me.
Right on the cusp.
But so make it 15, make it whatever it needs to be. But I do think that our taxes have gone up for infrastructure, which comes from growth and new people moving in. In the state of California, they have a thing called Mello-Roos, which is an additional assessment can be anywhere between 15 and 25 years that neighborhood pays in additional taxes. So I think there's different ways to address it, but you have a state that people have lived in their home for 20 plus years, and all these crazy people came here for refuge, and great. But suddenly the people that have lived here for so many years are being punished financially. I don't agree with that. I think that's awful. You have developer fees. There's lots of ways that the real estate explosion and infrastructure has been funded in states. There's lots of different levers you can pull. But yeah, first of all, I support, looking at spending, which drives the taxes. Sure. But as far as property tax, I'd like to learn more about Senator Grove's proposal and see the math on that. I think we're looking for anything that's a bit unique or out of the box. And yeah, I do think there needs to be a point at which, maybe at 15 years, whatever it is, it's cut in half. We have the circuit breaker program for disabled, both. My cousin is on one. Canyon County and Ada County as well. Circuit breaker for those that are disabled that qualify for Social Security on disability, so they don't have an income. Maybe it's 20 years. Whatever the numbers are, you can move the levers. But we need to do something, when you have a state that has such an influx of new people that come here for the right reasons. It's just, I don't think it's fair, use that word carefully, for natives to suffer. I just don't think it's appropriate.
Yeah, I don't. And I was speaking with Blair Moss about this. The the increase in property taxes because of the influx of people from out of state is very analogous to the difficulty that California had in the 50s and 60s and 70s before Prop 13 was put into place, which essentially restricted significantly the amount of property tax could be increased year after year.
Correct.
So I think you can only go up like 3%, even though the housing prices went up 10 or 20 or 50%. The thing that I get worried about with the idea that you're going to take away taxes, like remove taxes from somebody who's lived here for a certain duration of time, or is essentially do the benefits that they get go away, right? Like whatever the property taxes go to, say it's road maintenance, right? Is the person no longer driving on the road? And
no, but they have certainly paid into that system for decades that you and I didn't.
Sure,
Right.
sure,
absolutely.
absolutely.
And yeah, so it goes back to, so the developers get the fee, which then gets passed, do we hammer the developers more, which then gets passed on to the buyer anyway? It's the same game. But if we didn't have $600 million in surplus in 1 year, perhaps this isn't the discussion we'd be having.
Right.
But clearly the growth has benefited the coffers of our government. Not quite sure I agree with how that money's been allocated. And I do I'm always going to look at, like I did when I was in healthcare, how does this affect the member? How do I get the cost of an MRI down? How do I make sure the physician is not punished for having an office visit? How do I get the cost of labs down? It goes back to the same approach of how do we address this? We have people that have lived their whole lives here that suddenly have tax bills that require them to go back to work. I'm not going to say my age, but I'm coming close to just declaring it at this point. I don't want to have to go back to work at age 68 or 70, so I pay my taxes on my house. That's immoral to me. So again, native, if you've been in your home, let's use 20 years as the marker. Maybe at 15 years, you get 25% off of whatever the bill is, and at 20, it's 50 or whatever. I do believe there's a point at which someone who's been in a primary residence, and I'm not talking about I move every 3 years, but a primary residence for at least a decade or 15 years ought to not necessarily be paying what people that just moved here paid.
Yes, I actually very much agree with that. And the Prop 13, again, not to go back to that, I've always appreciated that, which is, look, you, just like you're saying, somebody who's lived in a residence for 20 plus years, they absolutely should not be financially coupled to the popularity of their area, right? So Idaho has become far more popular for obvious reasons for a lot of people, and the people that were already living here shouldn't be paying 2 and 3 and 4 times the property tax they were 10 years ago. It just doesn't make sense.
And they're not responsible for the excess demand on the infrastructure.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that,
that's
I think
fair.
that's.
Yeah.
I think I want to really have. I hope I have the opportunity, if elected, to sit down and really talk about what is the way that we address that, whether it be the sales tax. And again, our sales tax, thankfully, is still at 6%. Is there a way that we need to reduce that? And we have to be careful about these conversations as far as handing big checks back. I do think we need to be fiscally prudent. We're already in an economic downturn, and sadly, it's going to get worse for a while. So we need to make sure that we can cover our expenses here in Idaho as far as maintaining quality of life, maintaining infrastructure, doing the roads we need to do, and all that good stuff. Now that we have a $3 billion Medicaid expansion problem, and that's a whole other conversation. That's the other thing about handouts, is that when you start doing it for 1 year, it's very difficult to not do it for the future years. So that is another concern I have. So we have all this extra money. Some should be going to reserves. A lot should be going back to the people that generated it. But going forward, how do we make sure that we don't get ourselves into a situation where, the government itself is out of money?
Man, the perpetuating costs, developing programs and then never ending them has got to be like one of my most real concerns. Yeah. I have a brother who became very, very educated later in life. So, we all went to, my siblings and I all went to undergrad, which is great. We all went to the UC system. And my brother actually one of my brothers actually went on to get a PhD from Princeton, which was great. I was like, good for you. And he actually had a very, very rough teen year and early adulthood. So he actually got his GED. He hadn't graduated from high school, so he gets his GED, then goes to City College, and then goes to UCLA, and then goes to Princeton. Yeah. So it was like this great success story. And again, a big testament to the junior college program, and he was able to do that. And speaking of higher education, it's like, man, you don't need free college for everyone. This is obviously a side note, but you don't need free college for everyone. You need accessible junior college and realistic programs that hold people accountable. You don't need to just make everything free because, again, what's the point of that? Nothing's free. And anyway. So back to this. I'm sorry. I've just really worked up over the whole Biden forgiving student loans. There's like
the unconstitutional one.
Man, he is so his checks and balance. By the way, he's like, listen, if you're making under, I think it was $250,000, you can get this $10,000 or $20,000 you can apply for this $10,000 or $20,000 forgiveness. He's like, so we're going to guarantee that people who aren't making, a lot of money or, these professional degrees, they don't get this forgiveness. It's like, okay, what about somebody who just went to law school? They just graduated. They're not making a ton of money yet. They're going to get their law school forgiven. Those are the last people you need to forgive, or a physician, right? Physicians have to go through internships and residencies. They're not making very much money. You're going to forgive their medical school. And if you want to have a national conversation about how we need more accessible and more robust medical school systems, and we need to develop the DO system, the MD system, that's fine. We can have that conversation. But making the argument that everyone, like some steel worker in Minnesota, should be paying for some attorney in California that student loan because that student went to a, USC law school or something, like, it's laughable. Anyway.
Well, we can talk about the degrees they get as well.
Oh, my gosh. There's something, when somebody says sociology, there's some kind of like spidey sense that goes up. I can't. Like, I get so worked up. My blood gets so hot because I'm not against liberal arts. Like, I want to be very clear. I went into Berkeley as a math major. I was a big fan of math. And I kind of fell out of love with math. Fine, it happens. So when I was 20, I fell in love with writing. And I'm like, oh, I'll go to law school. This is great. So I started studying rhetoric, learned how to communicate, learned how to write, learned how to think. Not what to think, grand distinction, but how to think. Yeah. And that degree has served me very, very well. Now, here's the problem. Somebody else with a rhetoric degree may have come out of UC Berkeley and said, like, oh, this isn't fair. You should forgive my student loans because I got this degree that's useless. Is the degree really useless, or are you useless? Like, are you using the degree? I like to think I have used my degree very effectively. We shouldn't be forgiving loans that people don't know how to readily use, like sociology. You don't know how to use your sociology degree? Okay, well, first off, a lot of jobs that you might be applying to just require an undergrad. So stop thinking very specific to that sociology curriculum. And second, maybe you're the problem, right? And third, maybe we should stop offering degrees that have no real, tangible, clear path to progress, right? Like, how are you enriching a student's life to the tune of $150,000 with this piece of paper? Like, tell me exactly what they're going to learn, aside from how people organize themselves within city settings. Like, I'm sorry.
You haven't been on LinkedIn recently, have you?
I don't hang out on LinkedIn. No, I don't.
LinkedIn used to be an enjoyable professional platform, and there's a lot of self-promotion and things like that. And talk about a sad, and I'm not the only one that, I don't post it, but other people post it. It's a sad state of affairs. On any given day, I might open up LinkedIn and I just have a very generic feed. I don't, really say too much on there. And I have a couple of physicians I follow, which are interesting, and business partners and people I've worked with. But it's, I just want you to see that this is my natural hairstyle, and I'm standing up for my natural hairstyle, whatever it is. I don't care which hairstyle is. Excuse me. Or a lot of very sad stories. LinkedIn has become maybe a less virulent form of Facebook. And that's fine. I mean, again, businesses are going to choose their model and which way they're going to go. But, posting the suicide of your child, it is an unbelievably common post, which is heartbreaking. And, a little bit off tangent subject here, but, goodness, I hope you're getting counseling and support. And why do you think that LinkedIn is the place?
Venue, is the place to
you'll
talk
get people
about
going,
this.
oh, my heart's coming, no. But I actually just feel bad for those people, because for you to post that, and it always starts out, I've never posted anything personal on LinkedIn before, but I had to do this. And it's either the anniversary of a suicide, or it's a hairstyle issue, or it's somebody made me mad. It's a very sad place. But you're talking about degrees, and
yes,
people will go on and say,
yes.
I've had this many interviews, and how come nobody will hire me? And having hired people, I managed a staff of 95 when I was doing some consulting, and it's not my favorite thing. I'm very honest about that, because I can be kind of demanding in my work ethic, right. Which I demand of myself as well. But I just quickly check their resume, and every job is 6 months. So again, same thing,
why?
self-reflection. Why is it you only last 6 months, whether your choice or the employer's? Now, people go through layoffs, and all those things are excusable, but
sure.
But it's just amazing to me what people will post on social media.
Right.
And again, I'm old school, though. I don't like the fact my daughter has Instagram. I don't like. I don't do any of that. But
right.
It is amazing to me, the culture of work. Obviously, COVID massively impacted that. And then watching the fallout, I think, psychologically. Obviously, we know we have a problem with kids now. But even the fallout of people that would be normally considered, professionals, or however you define that, just they're what LinkedIn's become.
Right.
I can only imagine what their Facebook page looks
well,
like.
I mean, you can't spend any time. Like, I don't spend any time on for professionals. So I do marketing content. So like an attorney needs a social media, or a dentist needs a social media, or whatever it is. You need high quality professional. Reflective content. And it's very difficult for somebody who's working as an attorney, or as a dentist, or as, a lab manager, to sit down and say, okay, now what would be intriguing to post? Like, it's a very difficult, they just don't have time or the interest.
Right.
So that's the only time I spend on it. But you have to sift through so much nonsense to deal with being on those platforms. Like, what are people thinking? And I think it comes a lot of it comes down to personal accountability. So you talk about individuals on LinkedIn complaining about jobs. Okay, here's the thing. If you were holding yourself personally accountable, okay, and you kept getting rejected from interviews, would you go on to LinkedIn and say, you know what? I've been screwing up all these interviews. I didn't dress appropriately. I didn't do my homework beforehand. I didn't polish up my resume. I didn't do boom, 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 boom. You're not going in there to be self-deprecating and call out all of the painfully honest aspects of your failings. You're going on there to blame someone else, right? Because the people who actually take ownership, they're like, all right, look, you didn't dress the part. Like, you went to this interview, you were wearing a dirty t-shirt, or your hair was a mess, and it wasn't like a fashionable mess. It was just a mess. Or your resume had typos in it, or all of these individual things. You're going to fix those things. And those aren't even things you want to tell anyone about. You're like, I kind of made a fool of myself today. # my bad. These are things that the social media is not designed to reflect true personal accountability. Right. And there's a lot of hustle content out there where people are like, get after it. But that's an industry in and of itself. Right. Yeah. People are generally kind of marketing themselves as, a motivational individual or something like that. It's not, you never see somebody posting about like the realities of their life and how they've screwed up. It's kind of interesting.
Correct. And it goes, deeper for me, just as a human being looking at it. And I used to teach classes on Twitter. I handled social media decades ago, before it was, all the rage. And there's a great use of it, right? And then, of course, there's always everything else that comes along with it. But it goes back to, why is this the place? Do you not have family, friends, or some type of support network? Why is this the place that you want to air that? And there'll always be a justification. I'm not going to argue that. But my limit, my posts on LinkedIn are almost non-existent. I mean, I'll like something if a physician says something. COVID was really challenging, not to respond too much. But I'm not on Facebook. I signed off in 2009. There's a couple different reasons for that. I don't think it's a healthful environment for anybody. When I hear about families dividing over Trump or anything else, on Facebook, I just shudder. Why is this normal to you? Again, my view, just my view. Twitter, I used to have a lot of different accounts. I'm real into dog rescue, so I actually had a Chihuahua account. Don't ask.
Chihuahua specific account?
It was a Chihuahua specific account. It was when Twitter was very, very new. And the thing about Twitter that I like is that when people say, I just don't get Twitter, it's just, and I go, well, think about it as a cocktail party that you walk into by yourself, okay? And when you go to a cocktail party, there's a group of people sitting over here talking about whatever, and that's what a room is like. And Twitter is, you go in and stand next to a group that maybe looks like they might be your people, or at least interesting, even if you disagree with the people, just an interesting conversation. And you'll listen for a while, you'll get a feed, you'll follow some people, you go, that person's crazy, or too angry, or I'm not interested, and you move to the next group. And Twitter is like that. So the goal of Twitter, to really appreciate Twitter, first of all, it's funny as heck. If you follow some people that are witty, and I will open up posts on my own feed and just laugh and laugh and laugh. And it's not that they're making fun of a person, it's just something funny. And I do like dog videos, okay? So that's part of it.
Why can't we just get back to like cat and dog videos, and like little witty memes,
Yes.
I mean, we have to like...
Well, and I do make sure some of that's in my feed, right? But there's very few. I think Twitter has the opportunity to have some of the truest news feed. And I knew that years ago. I think it was during the Iraqi Spring when there was not a lot coming through. There were some hackers that, just like an Elon Musk with his Starlink, as the government was shutting down the protests, these people, and they were actually in Northern California. I believe it was actually Berkeley centered. Again, we're talking
quite a while ago.
2005-06. I'd have to trace my Iraqi Spring, but they would literally set up an internet site for these people to post videos, because otherwise we wouldn't know what was going on. So you go back to that, and then Twitter's gone significance came down to, because the news agencies usually judge by how quickly you get the breaking story and how accurate it is, and Twitter pretty much took that over, which was fascinating for me to watch. And it's very important who you choose to follow. There's only a few politicians that I follow that I trust. I am a fan of Thomas Massie and Rand Paul. I think they are honest. Rand has always stayed true to his particular belief system, which is he's more of a libertarian. Thomas Massie is brilliant and funny. And I remember the day he actually started following me. I was so happy. I have nothing of importance to say, but thank you. So again, you choose those news sources, and I don't mean choose the ones I like. I choose the ones that I have over and over found to be legitimate and credible. I know a lot of people, sadly, that I don't listen to the news, and I think that's the wrong direction to go. So for me, local news, which is very important, I watch CBS too. I find it to be the least left-leaning, because most news agencies do have a bit of a bias. But I want to see the weather, and I want to see what's going on in my neighborhood. I support Don Day's Boise Dev. I think they do a great job. Remember, my degree's in journalism. So,
Boise Dev, I enjoy them.
I love it because I do think they try to get to the meat of a story with the least amount of bias. And I do pay the subscription because I want to support that business as well. But to shut yourself off from news altogether, or God forbid, just to depend on Facebook, it's tough. I have a women's group that we formed here in this area called Dry Creek Conservative Women. It's not formal. It's just we get together for coffee and chat. We're like-minded, link several subdivisions together. We had a coffee get-together recently, and there was a person that was talking about, the bad things. Everything's bad. And I said, yeah, but there have been some great victories too. And she goes, well, I don't hear any. And I go, well, do you know what happened in Arizona? No. I said, well, do you know who Carrie Lake is? Never heard of her. At that point, I don't even know what to say. you're shutting yourself off from the good stuff, because good stuff is
Right.
happening too. I mean, there is a lot of challenging things we're all facing nationally. We just tell people all the time, you can't, today, there is nothing you can do about that. Nothing. Not your raging, not
Right.
your conspiracy theory.
Right.
There's a person, JFK Jr. is still alive. Okay, I
Okay.
I don't
That's
agree
fine.
with you, but here's my point. And what relevance is that
Right.
to you today in
Right.
Idaho to being able to pay your bills, put gas in your car, enjoy raising a family? Politics does need to be local. The reason I entered this particular race, this is District 19 that I'm choosing to represent, House Seat A, is that I've lived here. Now, I've lived in Idaho 11 years. I started out in Meridian. I saw what was happening with Chinden. I was driving downtown for my job, and I said, oh, this isn't going to work for me. I don't want to be near a Costco. God bless you,
Right.
Costco. It's just not my store. So I was dragged out to Hidden Springs. I kept saying, no, I've done the white picket fence thing. And my realtor, God bless her, because I've had her for a while, and she says, no, come over here. And so I live in a place where I'm very, very happy in Hidden Springs. I could not be happier. But District 19, and I talked about in my podcast, has really not been challenged. We've had the incumbents who have been Democrats for 20 years. And District 19's geography, if you think about how we district, is about every 10 plus years for the census. So District 19 was pretty much just the north end and some of the surrounding neighborhoods, which are highly Democratic. But in the past 10 years, you've had the explosion to the east all the way out to Warm Springs, and of course the explosion of houses, however you feel about that, up to Avamore. And so the numbers and the people occupying those houses don't necessarily agree with the leadership decisions or the votes of the people that are incumbents. So my opponent is Lauren Negachia. Interestingly enough, she was also elected as the chair of the Democratic Party for the state. So obviously in a very powerful position. She has a lot of quotes in the press. I do have a question for her, though. I mean, given that you're a hardcore Democrat and you're the chair of the entire party, why are you registered as a Republican? Yeah, as of September 2021, she was registered as a Republican. Goes back to how our primaries in the Republican primaries are manipulated by people that register as Republicans but vote differently in the primary to influence the outcome. That's a whole other story.
Yeah, I had no idea.
But yeah, I do find that entertaining to be, oddly enough, to be the chair, and even while you're in office, you register as a Republican. It's not illegal. It's odd.
Right.
Potentially unethical.
Right. Raises questions.
I would not register as a Democrat because I don't necessarily support those platforms. So I find it entertaining, or at least interesting, to see that. But anyway, so District 19 has grown so much that the opportunity to challenge that, again, how about some more reasonable voices, right? The conservatives here, fiscal conservatives, social conservatives, have no voice in their representatives. And in fact, and I would say this sadly, is that the Democrats in Idaho, and I'll call out my opponent, have really swung far left. And so how do we get the pendulum back? I had a wonderful gentleman, as we are distributing literature, there was a gentleman that actually emailed me, which I thought was terrific. As a candidate, you don't often get emails. And he asked me, he says, well, I noticed you said something about, getting more radical left. What do you think is so radical? And he took the time to email me, so I'm assuming, that he's a pretty moderate person. And he said, I'm a Democrat, and, I said, okay, fine. And so I just sort of walked him through and said, let's use a Kennedy Democrat as a standard. Perhaps we can agree on that, right? Because those are pretty moderate. I said, there is no way that John Kennedy or Bobby Kennedy would agree with CRT teaching because it is racist. It is to oppress one group over another. That's not something they would ever support. I said, certainly JFK and Robert Kennedy are not going to support abortion on demand because given their moral status. And I said, so you start to see if we use Kennedy Democrats as a middle ground, and I think that's a fair statement, given, again, we're talking older policies, you can see how far left the party has gone. And his comment, and I mentioned that I was a grandmother at some point during the email, and he came back. He was very sweet, and he said, well, I am pro-life, but we'll probably agree to disagree on a couple elements of that. But he goes, but I'm a grandparent as well, so because you're a grandparent, I'm a grandparent, you have my vote. But I think I think the issue there that so pleased me as a candidate, and I wish there was more of it, and there isn't, is that someone says, let's sit down and talk about why do you say that and why do you believe that. We may still disagree, but what I hope the takeaway is that I'm a reasonable person. Again, if you look at my career, especially the last 20 years, it's negotiating really tough issues, which is money. There's really not a tougher thing to argue than money, and where do you find reason? I do think the abortion law here in Idaho, of course, part of it's being challenged, is misunderstood and misrepresented. That bothers me too. If you don't like it on its face, then that's fine, but don't say it is something that it is not. So there was a comment the other day about, physicians will be, arrested and this, that, and the other, and I said, no, the physician in this language specifically says the physician has the sole authority in his or her medical judgment to make a determination if a pregnant woman's life is in danger. So how can a physician be prosecuted again unless they're faking it? Yeah, right. It's and I'm not saying that it isn't an emotional issue, because it is, but I think we just need to make sure that people understand what the law is and isn't. And I just see a lot of misrepresentation about the law, and that bothers me. If you understand the law fully and oppose it, then say, I just think that abortion should be on demand, because that really is your position, because the law protects against incest and rape, but you have to file a police report, so you can't fake that. Protects the physician as long as it's in your independent medical judgment. Remember, I go back to the sanctity of the physician-patient relationship, so I don't have a problem with that. Excuse me, but there's a lot of misinformation. There was a person on Twitter that posted, I'm paraphrasing it, but when your wife is dying of sepsis because of a miscarriage and the physician can't treat her, you'll regret this law. Well, there's just so much false in that statement. Well, first of all, sepsis is treatable. Second of all, a miscarriage isn't an abortion. Third of all, the physician... And by the way, then we have EMTALA. So, again, if you oppose the law as it's written, fine, that's your opposition. But I am disturbed by how many people misrepresent, and my opponent has actually used some fairly inflammatory language. I do think that Lauren, in a position as the chair, has probably had to move a bit more left to appease some of her base. There's probably not going to be an opportunity for her and I to sit down and talk about it personally. That's okay. But yeah, it's unfortunate that there isn't a bit more transparency there.
Yeah. Well, listen, I know I've taken a lot of your time today. I appreciate you coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you for everything you're doing. Thank you for, putting the good fight up. Just participation. Win, lose, or draw, I think it's so wonderful when people, say, hey, look, as you were pointing out, District 19 has gone unopposed, right? It's been Democratic. Yeah. We need to have push.
Yes.
We need to have push, just like we were talking about with public education. You get more people in the room, you get more diverse thoughts, and the best things win the day.
Absolutely.
And in the absence of that, if you're doing it in a vacuum, you will not have the best. You will not have the best policies or best ideas laid to bear for the public. So, thank you for what you're doing. I do appreciate
it. Hey, I appreciate the support. I've met amazing people. What an adventure! And it goes into my Nana scrapbook for my grandkids.
That's wonderful. Well, good luck. You're just a couple weeks away, right?
Yeah, November 8th.
November 8th. Here we go. Well, again, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Quick shout out to our sponsor, C Squared Social. C Squared Social is the leading expert in social media marketing and creative marketing. They have fantastic platforms. I have been a client of theirs for some time. I cannot recommend them highly enough. C Squared Social for all of your social media and creative marketing needs.